It's my pleasure to introduce our next guest, Mark O'Neill, Chief Operating Officer at Cox Automotive. Mark, the stage is yours.
Boy, can I just say that I hate following someone who's really funny, who's really insightful, worldly, globalist, perspective on everything. I don't know where I'm going to start here to try to follow that, but I'll do my best to try to be a little insightful, at least in the area of digital retailing. Now, the presentation here says connected retail, but there's so many aspects of connected retail. In 25 minutes, I felt like we could really only dig deep on one area, and that's to share a perspective on where I think the industry is and where the industry needs to go on digital retailing, which is actually transacting outside of the dealership in a digital environment. And I think if we think about what the consumer wants and we ground ourselves in the consumer always gets what they want. If you think about any retail category out there, the consumer inevitably wins in getting it their way. And I would argue with you, the customer is ready and the customer wants to be able to transact digitally. Now, it's a complex transaction. It won't quite be click to buy because there are many steps to the process. And let's just ground when we say digital retailing, what the steps are. So there are a couple of steps. And if you look on I guess your left, there are 5 steps we think need to be in place to be able to allow the consumer to engage digitally with the dealership. So a real payment, not a payment calculator, but a real payment, a program that exists. Don't ever serve up something that a lender can't support. 2, actually a finance approval, a commitment to deliver that financing to the customer at the terms that were displayed and agreed to. Very important you do the F&I presentation. Mike just talked about the dealership being under pressure from a margin perspective. It's important to preserve the F&I margin. I think the F&I margin can be preserved. And of course, you've got to handle the trade. So many consumers are in one of 2 situations. Either they owe money on the trade that needs to be rolled into the next deal, or the trade is their down payment money. And so without that, you really can't complete a transaction. And the last piece is actually execution of the contract to legally create a legally binding transaction. So that's what we mean when we say digital retailing. And if you look to the other side of the slide there, a little bit taking the cheat sheet from the levels in autonomous cars, tried to define for this presentation, 0 is where we are today, and 3 is completely autonomous, or we'll call it here completely digital. So what do we think this is going to look like? This curve, we think, would very accurately describe what we think the adoption curve for digital retailing will look like. And this begs the question of what are the endpoints? There are no measurements on this slide in terms of percentages or time. Let me get to that. I'd like to build up, but I would tell you that right now we're in the experimental stage. We're in the early adoption. We're definitely in the flatter part of the curve. But why are we so convinced that this curve looks like it does? Because we only have to look around ourselves at any new technology. And I could have put 10 different slides up here. I could have taken the iPhone from 10 years ago. I could take Fitbit, could take any new technology and superimpose it over this. In this case, we have Uber and Airbnb up there. And you see this period of experimentation, of trying to understand the technology. And probably in both of these cases, the provider of the technology trying to debug and really optimize the technology for the consumer. But once it's optimized, and once the consumer gets a taste of something a little different, and in both of these cases, the consumer was looking for something different, right? The consumer wasn't happy with the taxi industry, whether it was the quality of the ride, whether it was the quality of the driver, or whether it was the price of the service. The consumer wasn't happy. Same with Airbnb. The convenience of the service, the breadth of the offering, the difference in going from a room to a house or something more complex and doing it very economically drove it. In a minute, you'll see we have many of the same challenges in our industry. So it's all around us. It's just new technology, and it typically, when it starts to grow, it grows incredibly quickly. And you can say, well, put those aside. Those two are unique examples. Although I'd argue that if I'd put the iPhone slide up there, you wouldn't have said that's any more unique, or maybe even the Fitbit slide or any other technology. But let's just look at online shopping in general. And this is all retail. So this includes food, it includes electronics, soft goods, hard goods, everything retail. And if you look carefully at this slide, you'll notice that it goes right through the recession. If I've ever seen a slide over an extended period of time that is about as formidable in terms of showing that there is a path, a growth path that is unstoppable, this would be it. There is nothing that is going to get in the way of the consumer embracing more and more of the transaction digitally. This slide, by the way, it's growing the online retailing, so electronic commerce in general, is growing at 15% a quarter. And if any of you follow Amazon stock, you'll see that they're a huge beneficiary. But look at the flip side of it. There is not a week that's gone by probably this year where a physical retailer hasn't announced some downsizing of stores, some restructuring of their physical presence, because the consumer is opting for a different model. Now we can say, not in auto, we're different. And you always hear the industry, the last one to adopt, say, we're different, it won't happen here. But would we really have imagined 10 years ago that all of these categories would have become digital? Amazon, okay, but it started with just books. And if you think how pervasive it is right now, if you think of mortgages, a very regulated industry, a lot of similarities in some ways to ours, very complex. Something as simple as pizza. Today you might hear Domino's described as a technology company delivering pizza, not the reverse. Zappos, eyeglasses, Warby Parker, they're all industries that have been dramatically transformed by the ability for the consumer to engage in a digital way. And why does the consumer want that? Because it saves time. They're all transparent concepts. And oh, by the way, the consumer gets more comfortable with technology every day that goes by. Just think about tomorrow if you didn't have your phone with you for a day. You'd be in withdrawal. You probably couldn't function. You'd view yourself as highly unproductive. And I think go back to that side of digital retailing hub, that is what's coming into our industry. Whoever creates the digital solution wins the game. Now others will quickly follow, so it won't be singular, but our view would be it's going to happen. If we don't do it ourselves as an industry, someone from outside the industry will come in and make it happen. So we can start to see that. Tesla came up already this morning. It's probably come up multiple times in multiple talks. I would argue that it's as much the experience of buying a Tesla as it is the car itself. The car's neat, it's electric, and it goes really fast, and it's quiet, it's comfortable. There's a lot of nice things about it. Super expensive. But if you also look at the process of buying one, it is enormously friendly. It is a completely different experience. It is virtually all online. You configure your car online. You set up your account just as you would with any other retailer. You configure the car online. You order the car online. You get your delivery number online. You do your financing online. The trade doesn't happen very elegantly yet today. There's a range, there's an offer generally, not very specific, a little different if you're trading in a Tesla. And of course, most of the paperwork you still execute at the dealership, but you're executing at the point of huge enjoyment. It's the delivery part of the cycle, and signing the paperwork there is really no issue. Carvana is, do we really think vending machines for used cars is the solution for auto retailing? It's not about the physical form, it's the fact that they're engaging differently. They're creating a new experience by leveraging technology. We are ready for it in the industry. And why do I say we're ready for it? So I look back at some research that we did in 2011, so 6 years ago, and some research we just completed this year. And if you look at 6 years ago, what consumers told us they didn't like about the car buying process, and you compare that to the list on the right of what they don't like today, you don't see much has changed there. And I would argue to anyone here, think about being frustrated for 6 years. Imagine if your grocery experience was such that every grocer you went to always put the eggs on the bottom and whatever the heavy stuff is on top, potatoes or cans of something. And it happened for 6 years. Do you think someone would come up with a new bagging concept? Do you think you'd get frustrated enough to say, I'm not going to go to this grocer, I'm going to go to a different one, I'm going to go somewhere else? I would argue the balloon is really full right now, and it's going to pop. The consumer's frustrated. The first and best alternative to the buying experience that comes out there digitally, they are going to jump to get, because they've had too long a time of being frustrated and seeing too many other opportunities in other areas. The only difference you see in these two lists is a trade-in. And my guess is, had we gone back in the 2011 data, it wouldn't have been a top 4, but it might have been 5 or 6. So we see a little reordering, but we see a customer continuously frustrated. So the research, if you look at it a little bit more, and we graph it out, looks something like this. It's really fun to start the process. It's really fun engaging with someone who knows a lot about a vehicle. So that's the learning, that's the sorting it out, that's great. It's not so fun comparing vehicles and finding payments. And one, because one franchise doesn't make it easy to compare to another franchise. And two, then payment starts the negotiation process. Definitely not fun. But you get a chance to sit in the car and go for a ride, boy, to fun. Okay, now we got to go back through F&I, not so fun. And at the end of the process, of course, we're driving away with our new car, lots of fun. So typically what happens in industries where you have this fun and not so fun is someone figure out how to eliminate all the not fun and just make it fun straight across. Why do we pay $5 for a cup of Starbucks coffee when you can buy the same cup of coffee for $1 in 100 other places? Because they make it fun. It's a nice experience. It's real enjoyable. I don't know whether that's the music, the chit chat with the barista, whatever it might be. It's an enjoyable experience. And today, we've got to figure out how to make the whole experience enjoyable. And if we don't, then new technologies will come out that disrupt, that take the unfun parts and make them fun, just like any other industry. But why let someone do that outside? So what are the pieces here we're dealing with, and what do we see happening? So you see this process of the consumer, no longer shopping multiple dealerships. And why did that happen? Because they could get all the information they'd get by driving around. They could consume it electronically on their terms in a transparent way. So therefore, you don't need to come into the store. Second thing we learned from the research is they don't like the process, it's too long. But interestingly enough, the consumer's willing to do it on their time, spend even more time, but it's on their terms and their time. That doesn't really count as the in-store process. They'll shop for hours at home and not consider that a negative part of the process, but it's very negative when you get in the store. So why not let them do the F&I process online? It can be done very successfully. And I'm going to show you a quick video. Oh, no, let me do one other slide, and then I'm going to show you a quick video. So this is more research we've done with consumers on trying to understand, are they ready for this? You know, I showed you lots of data that said we believed it was. Then we went out and asked them more directly. And basically, 6 out of 10 said they want to get the negotiation done before they walk in the store. They want to do that digitally. They do not want to do that in the store. And roughly 3/4 said that they already know what they want when they go in the store. Well, that must be true. If you're only visiting 1, maybe 2 stores, you have to know what you want. And again, I hear that from dealers. They don't know what they want. They're not ready. We've got to show them a lot of choices and options. I would argue you don't. Most consumers, as the data would say, know what they want and are ready to transact. Let them transact. So how might they do that transaction? Let's take a quick look here at a video of how this might work. Now, for those in the back and those in the sides, you see the steps of the process happening. You see a consumer applying for financing. You see them trying to value their trade. You're going to see an F&I presentation momentarily. You're going to see, well, you couldn't tell with the speed there, the payments. There were real payments being served up, rates and programs we knew existed. In essence, every part of the process can be digitally executed now in a simple way. There's a lot going on here. At the top, you might notice something very similar to Amazon, which is a little bar of where you are in the process and what you have to do next. Again, pretty standard in retailing. Help the consumer through the journey, let them know where they stand at any one point in time. Oh, by the way, embedded in the technology is the ability to stop at any one point in time and pick it up right where you left off and not have any issue with having to redo something. Really simple. Now, is it elegant today? Is it as intuitive as it could be? I'd argue it's not, and it needs to be more of that. But I would also argue that there's enough pieces of it that are there, and we have enough data that shows the consumer is ready for it, that I would encourage everyone in the industry to take a shot at experimenting, at least in part of the digital retailing equation. Start getting yourself comfortable, start understanding how to execute, because you have to re-engineer your processes to do it. And when we look at the data, now we only have snippets of it. So we look at how did the customer feel about doing the credit part on their own digitally versus in the store? How did they feel about looking at real payments versus using a payment calculator? How did they feel about handling the trade online, getting a guaranteed offer? So we've taken pieces of it, and we understand from those pieces that for those segments, they're enormously more happy. I think that would actually be more correct to say they're happier to execute it digitally by factors of 2 and 3 than they are to do it engaging personally across a desk or in a physical showroom. So think for a moment, if someone adopts digital retailing in your market and you don't adopt it, and the reviews are 2 to 3 times more positive, where is that consumer going to go shop? Or if the experience is offered by a disruptive player versus an engaging, forward-thinking dealer, where's the consumer going to put their business? They're going to go where the experience is better. We see it in every category. It's unrefutable. And they're going to do it because it's so much more expensive. It's so much more enjoyable. So now we said, let's look at some data off the websites. Let's see what kind of engagement we're seeing. Let's see, again, we don't have a whole suite, so we don't have a piece of data that says, here's the perfect online, completely connected digital transaction. Again, so we have pieces, but what happens with engagement online? When dealerships put on their websites components of digital retailing, and that could be applying for credit, it could be the trade, it could be looking at real payments, they see conversion on just that customer website traffic 11% higher than without it. The consumer spends 7% more time on the dealer's website. So they're hungry for it. They're seeing pieces, but we haven't connected all the pieces yet. And when they're connected, we absolutely think, unequivocally, the consumer will opt for this as a preferred way to engage with a dealership. Doesn't mean they don't engage with the dealership. Real important. They're just going to engage at those fun spots. Maybe a little product Q&A in the beginning, learning more about the product, understanding about some features more than others. Certainly the test drive part, the delivery part, all the fun stuff, if you remember that curve, all the spikes, are still going to make the dealership very relevant. And we haven't yet even talked about ownership. So the biggest challenge I get when I talk to dealers about embracing digital retailing is, I'm going to get slaughtered in F&I. My margins are going to collapse. No one is going to buy a product. They need to be sold a product. Well, we have 2 sets of research in this area too. We gave consumers and dealerships iPads to let them conduct the transaction. And we also did some just research with consumers who'd gone through the buying process and looked at actual behavior, watching how they engage on an iPad versus how they did when they're being sold by an F&I manager. and then asking them the raw research, which you can see here, which is most consumers say they'd like to be more informed before they go in the store. They'd like to understand more about the products before they do it, just like any consumer would on any product. And oh, by the way, when we gave them the iPad and did that test versus a store, they bought more product than they were sold. And why did they do that, do we think? Because think about yourself as a consumer. When you're doing something that's self-directed on your terms, your time, and it's relevant content, so I'm not serving up content online that isn't relevant to the car you're buying and your past behavior. If I serve you up content that's relevant, you listen to that content, you consume that content, and you do it in a way that is very different than when you're physically standing or sitting across from someone and you know they're selling you something. Half of your mental capacity is spent thinking about, what am I being sold? Is it a good price? You know, what's the catch here? And only the other half is listening, what's the value of the content? But when you're doing it on your own, 100% of your time is going to, is this valuable to me? And so we found that consumers bought more than when they were sold. Now, these were more high-end dealerships. We don't have lots of data again, but we have enough data to suggest that it can be done. And oh, by the way, let's leverage one other thing that the consumer is very used to. Why don't we inform the consumer partway through this process how other consumers behave? So imagine now you're a Honda dealer and the customer is just looking at a Honda Accord LX, and after they've seen a little video presentation of a service contract or maybe a prepaid maintenance program, we flash up a little data that says 62% of customers who bought this car in the Chicago market also bought these two products. Sound familiar? Sound likely that they're going to buy? Do you think Amazon has a good uptake rate every time you buy a Kindle, where they want to sell you an extra cord, a cover to the Kindle, a box to store the cover, you know, stripes to stick on it, you know, that other consumers bought? We love it. We love to do what others are doing. And we think that's going to help drive digital retailing. So let me summarize kind of why we think digital retailing makes sense and why we think the dealership community and the OEM community, really it's a partnership, should embrace it. Our data shows you're going to sell cars faster. You're going to sell cars faster because of more interaction, more engagement with the dealership. You're going to get much more leverage of the team members. Look around you at any service right now, the airline industry. How much of the process do you do yourself? Gosh, you almost have to carry your own bag onto the plane these days. I mean, if you think about it, everything is done for you. If you think about any other retail category, the banking industry when the ATM was introduced, you get the consumer to do the work, and the consumer's happier, and your labor costs go way down. Or that labor cost per unit, per car sold, per bank transaction is spread over 2 or 3 times the number of transactions than it was historically. That drives your costs down. That helps retain profitability. We believe you can sell more F&I product. Not a lot more. I don't think there's $300 to $400 more gross, but I think there's $100 to $200 more. Then you can spend time with the customer on the fun stuff. They've done all the work, transaction's ready to go. When they're in the store, you're focused on educating them about the car. You're becoming the trusted expert. You're delivering that great retail experience that helps them understand how to be a better owner of that car. And oh, by the way, if you do that well, it sets you up for a great service experience, for continuing to engage with the dealership over the life cycle of that car. That's a win. So where are we today? This is a quick snapshot, and we took this based on looking at dealerships' websites of how many of the tools do they have available today, and to really begin to execute digital retailing. And at best, really generous counting here, we'd say about 6,000 of our 18,000 dealers have one or more component of the process, and the vast majority have only one, and most of it's around payments or getting approved for financing. But even half the approvals are really you're approved, but no specifics, come on into the dealership. Not probably what the consumer's really looking for in engagement. So we're seeing a little bit of testing, but honestly, it falls fairly flat. There's really not been a lot of embracing yet. And yet, if we deconstruct it and look at where we are now and how many of the different transaction points, you see tens of thousands of transactions, millions in some cases, consumers doing pieces of it. Our view would be, and I'm going to leverage Steve Jobs here for a moment. Steve Jobs said creativity, which another way to think of that is disruption, you can use either word, is simply about connecting things. And I would tell you, as soon as we connect those 5 things that I talked about digital retailing, we are going to see an enormous disruptive force happen in our industry. We think the consumer will completely embrace digital retailing. And I told you I'd give you the punchline here. What did I think the dimensions were on this curve? We're at a little less than 1% last year of all transactions were executed digitally. And honestly, if you think of Tesla sales, probably half of those are right there. So where do I think we'll end this year? I think we're going to be marginally between 1 and 2%. Why? Because the final piece of the technology, that contracting piece, which I'd argue has some of the most challenge to it, won't be really fully available till the end of this year. But it will be available at the end of this year in early stage. And next year, the entire connected suite will be possible. So my prediction is that as we start 18, whatever our jump off is in 17, so let's say it's 1.5%, it'll be at least 3% in 18. And if it's 3 in 18, it'll be 6 or more in 19. And if it's 6 or more, the following year it'll be 12 or more. So 10% by 20, at least 20% by 2022. And if I'm wrong, I think I'm wrong to the downside. I think you go back and look at some of those curves, that this could be 30% numbers of consumers who want to engage digitally. And again, you saw nowhere here where the dealership was displaced. The dealership has a super relevant role. It's just a different role. It's evolving to deliver a better client experience. And retailers who deliver better client experiences win the day. Embrace digital retailing. Thank you very much.